Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. So I should explain to everyone that you may hear an occasional plop. That's because my ceiling is leaking and has been for over a week.
Oh, my.
The shower upstairs is leaking within the wall, and it's coming out through the ceiling of the dining room. And our elliptical runner broke. Everything is going wrong here in our house. We basically have been backed into remodeling the bathroom, which we did not want to do and we cannot afford to do. He was like, I just need to replace 4 tiles on the wall and 4 tiles on the floor. But it turns out they no longer make tiles in that size or shape for either one. And so it's like, well, it's either going to look awful or we're just going to retile the whole shower. It's a whole thing. Never get involved in the tile industry, people. It's a racket.
Actually, we've been having a little bit of a leak through our roof. So at the moment, we just have a big tarp that has been put up there. But eventually, we are going to have something done. And dear God, I hope it's not replacing the entire roof.
Yes, that is something that often, you guys have been there for a long time, right? And do you still have your same roof? Because roofs tend to get replaced every 10 years or so.
We've been here 21 years.
And you've never replaced the roof?
No, we have not.
Yeah, it's time to replace that roof.
The hell you say? No. I was hoping we could get another 10 years out of it.
I guess the house was new when you moved in. You moved into a new house.
Yes.
Yeah, so that helps.
We will see.
Yes. On my other podcast, at one point, we were talking about the city cutting down trees on our lots. Me and my co-podcaster, Jonathan Oxley. I was editing the episode later, and I'm like, white landowners complaining about the government infringing on their property rights is maybe not the best look in this day and age. We were able to own a house due to a extreme sequence of good fortune. We've always had fantastic luck with housing. Every place we've ever lived, we've had fantastic housing luck. So it has continued here, thankfully. But we should go ahead and talk about some comics, some great comics. You out there in podcast land, if you just listen to this podcast and you never read the comics, this 1 week you should go ahead and get a Marvel Unlimited subscription and you should read these comics because we are going to be talking about how many, let's see, what are the
We're doing Doctor Strange, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Captain America, and Avengers for June 1968.
Yes, 4 great books. I cannot wait to talk about them. Why don't you do Doctor Strange so that I can do S.H.I.E.L.D.?
That is perfectly fine.
But I will also have a lot to say about Doctor Strange because I love this issue.
Right. Well, and it's sort of hard to tell what to say about it because it is a retelling of his origin for the most part. Well, not for the most part, almost entirely. I can go through and hit those plot points again and just talk a little bit about the art as we go through.
Well, there's the flashback to his origin, but there's also the modern day sequence in which Doctor Strange enjoys a long, leisurely smoke.
Yes, and wherein we find that the Sanctum Sanctorum probably smells like stale cigarette smoke.
Yes.
Right. So the cover says his origin at last, as though we had never heard his origin before. Now unto us is born the magician. The cover actually is one of my least favorite parts of this book.
Sure.
I don't know. What is it about it that bugs me? Doctor Strange is standing in sort of the middle ground looking towards us kind of heroically as we see his astral form projecting out from his body up above, looking kind of menacing, a brazier and a bunch of mystical looking statuary around him. Yeah, I don't know why it is that this cover bugs me a little bit, but the art inside is superb. The coming of Doctor Strange. Let the word go forth. Within these hallowed pages lies the first of many talismanic triumphs by the talented team of Stan Lee editor, Roy Thomas writer, Dan Adkins artist, superbly supported by Artie Simek letterer. Wait, this is the first of many talismanic triumphs by that team?
Well, we've had the team before, but this is the first time they've had a full-length book to work on.
I guess that's a good point. Yes.
But so this splash page is just gorgeous. You know, you can certainly see a lot of Wally Wood influence. Dan Atkins used to work for Wally Wood. You see Doctor Strange fastening his cloak while he is standing in front of an ornate wall with lots of statuary in the background. Atkins started off with this book. You know, he would later claim that he was told you should swipe every panel from Ditko. And he did. He swiped every single panel from Ditko except for a few things he swiped from the covers of pulp science fiction magazines and science fiction paperbacks. It was ridiculous. And then he always claimed that as he stayed on the book, he stopped swiping. Well, he certainly does not seem to be swiping in this issue. Even though this whole issue, he finally has a perfect excuse to swipe because he is just retelling one of Ditko's stories. And he could have just swiped every panel from that original story. Although it's interesting, that was I think an 8-page story. And here he gets to expand it to 20 pages and really goes to town expanding the story.
Well, I think him swiping, I think that depends on what your definition of swipe is.
Yes.
I believe that he used a lot of photo reference throughout this thing.
I don't consider that swiping, but yeah, it does seem like that.
I'm pretty sure I remember that Al Williamson would refer to his clippings for this kind of stuff as his swipe file. So so depending on your definition of swiping. But yes, it doesn't look like he's been swiping any artists here, just photographers.
Yes.
And on that splash page, he's thinking to himself, the weariness of 1,000 battles sorely oppresses me. I must sleep that I may thus regain needed strength. So indeed, we've been saying for a long time that he hasn't been able to use the bathroom or take a nap. Well, he's finally going to try to take his nap here.
Yes, he is not exaggerating here. It's literally been 1,000 battles. We have watched him fight 1,000 battles before he gets to sleep.
So we see him undressing, first taking off his cloak and then taking off his... Well, actually, how is he taking off that? It looks like he's wearing a tunic, but he's taking it off here as though it's a shirt. Mm-hmm. But once again, that's probably just the photo reference part of things. So he lays down and has horrible nightmares. We get on page 3 a splash page of seeing his black and white nightmare that he's having as he tries to get some rest. And it's a freaky looking scene. So at that point, he gets up and he enjoys a cigarette. He tries to relax by smoking a cig. So, yes. And at which point he begins to reminisce. Page 4, panel 3. Again, this seems clear to me that this is a photo reference from some surgical soap opera or something like that.
Yeah.
So we get to see him being the arrogant douchebag that we all know that he used to be. Of course, he remains one in the movies, but he does not here in the comics. So
yeah, and it's interesting, like his look, his sort of smug look on his face on page 5 is right out of Ditko in that it looks like the way smug people look in Ditko. So clearly he was opening back up the old comic. By the way, I did look it up. Yes, the original origin story was 8 pages. But it's the same sort of smug look Ditko would do, but clearly, completely redrawn by Adkins. It's not swiped at all.
Yeah, I guess I can see that. Yeah, the same kind of look, but not swiping from an actual drawing.
Yeah.
He, of course, has his horrible accident. When he comes out of it, the surgeon who operated on him is telling him that unfortunately you'll never be able to do surgery again. He's like, no, look, my hands are still strong. He's like, yeah, try holding a scalpel.
Yeah.
So he is distraught. He is drinking. He ends up becoming a derelict and hanging out by the docks and unshaven. Looks like maybe unhoused at this point, but he is able to get together enough money to, when he hears stories about the so-called Ancient One, take a plane to Central Asia. Or Central Asia, South Asia. I don't know. The Himalayas are sort of on the border between South Asia and Central Asia and East Asia. Like it's right there. So one way or the other. To somewhere in the Himalayas. I don't know what airport you would go to for that. We get a very nice double page top half splash of the Himalayas here. So it's the top half of the page goes across both pages here. He's hiking through snow in the Himalayas. Again, if he looked like he was probably without a home in the U.S., not only was he able to get a plane flight out here, but he was able to get some cold weather gear.
Yep.
And he's able to find the place, but it's in the middle of a snowstorm. Comes in and is confronted by who we later find out is indeed the Ancient One, a couple pages later. Doctor Strange is still his arrogant self saying, look, I know this is probably just all mumbo jumbo and whatever, but, you got to help me, which seems like a weird attitude to take, that I've come all this way because I have some faith that you might be able to help me, and yet I have no faith that you are anything but a fraud. I do notice that Dan Adkins does not seem to be drawing the Ancient One as having Asian features, which is an interesting choice. I don't know quite what to make of that, but okay, sure.
Mm-hmm.
So Doctor Strange meets Mordo, who is here as an already existing student of the Ancient One. And, once again, just fantastic art all through this thing. And
Yes.
Imaginative page layouts, too. Very unlike Ditko, who generally was known for his very rigidly gridded out pages. He's really playing around with panel layouts here, particularly page 15. There's a narrow panel up across the top of the page, a little inset panel on the left, then a panel that nominally takes up like 3/4 of the page, but it's got these two inset panels on top of it. And we see, once again, some fantastic exotic statuary throughout this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Really nice. Doctor Strange figures out that Mordo is actually evil and plotting against the Ancient One. He is discovered by Mordo, who then puts that whammy on him, where, as far as Doctor Strange knows, he now has an iron clamp over his mouth, but it turns out it's just a mystical iron clamp over his mouth. It doesn't actually exist, but it keeps him from saying anything to the Ancient One. It turns out, though, that, of course, the Ancient One knows, and he's known this whole time that Mordo was plotting against him, and, basically the old thing of keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see the Ancient One break the spell on Doctor Strange, and then we finally snap back to modern day, and Doctor Strange feels a mental summons from the Ancient One saying, "Help me, my son, help me." And he jumps into action, shirtless with his pajama bottoms and some little booties that he's wearing. And at the end it says, "Next, the return of one of the deadliest foes of all, Nightmare."
Yeah,
so
it's odd because the last issue we read was set in the Dream Dimension, but they never ran into Nightmare in the Dream Dimension, but now they do. I just can't go on enough about this issue. It's a great recap of the origin. I complained so much about all the other books we read, how they broke out into their new number one or took over the numbering of the anthology book they were in, and they were in the middle of a storyline, which was a terrible time to do it. And then they had to sort of shoehorn in an origin in the midst of this ongoing storyline that they were still trying to wrap up. That happened on Captain America, Iron Man, Submariner, and Hulk. Well, now, finally, when they did the last two, for some reason, Strange Tales with Doctor Strange and Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. lasted a little longer than those books, maybe because they realized, let's go ahead and wrap up those storylines. Doctor Strange in that book wrapped up a very long-running storyline, and they just had a little one-off story from Nick Fury so that both books could start fresh this month. And oh boy, was that a great idea.
Yes.
Starting Doctor Strange off in his own book, he takes over the numbering of Strange Tales. So it's Doctor Strange, Master of Mystic Arts number 169, but there was no 168. 168 was Strange Tales. And it is just gorgeous art. It is just wonderful. The nightmare you were pointing out on page 3, the big black and white nightmare he's having, is just gorgeous. I can't help but wonder if that might be taken from a sci-fi paperback cover, because it does kind of look like it. I do wish he wasn't smoking in the framing sequence. That's not great. Great job with the car crash on page 6, with the car going over the cliff, and then the twisted up wrecked car on the bottom of page 6 with the heavy use of light and shadow. The spotting of blacks in this issue is just excellent. It's just gorgeous. The 2-page spread of the Himalayas on page 10 and 11 is just amazing. When they would talk about the comic books of the early aughts, especially the comic books by Brian Hitch, they would say it was widescreen comics. They would say it was comics that felt like widescreen movies. Well, this is widescreen comics. This aspect ratio on this double-page spread of the Himalayan mountains, it very much feels like we're watching a widescreen movie in a wonderful way. The page I like least in this issue is page 18, which is yet another splash page, but we're really focused on Doctor Strange's butt. Dr. Strange's butt is taking up like a third of the page. It's a really weird chase for a splash, and not great. It's interesting on page 19.
Well, and it's not just focused on it. It's not like it's really like ooh, here's a glamour shot of his butt.
No.
He's still wearing baggy jammies, it looks like. You can't see much of anything. But yeah, his butt's just right there in your face.
No, I don't mean to make it sound like people who like Doctor Strange's butt will love this page. No, you won't. Even you won't be satisfied. And the rest of us are certainly not satisfied. It's interesting. We always talk about Kirby Crackle, but on page 19, he's sort of doing Ditko Crackle, which is these hatched lines going through black circles. This is just a gorgeous issue. I loved Marie Severin's run on Doctor Strange more than I've loved Dan Atkins' run on Doctor Strange. But this issue, he ups his game so much. I would say that this is now the best post-Ditko issue we've had.
I wouldn't argue with that. Yeah. Although one last thing I realized, or two last things I realized about that final panel in the story. One is he's actually just tossing his cigarette as he jumps into action. You see,
That's
it's
not
just
good.
No, he's just flicked it away, and it's still mid-air as he's jumping into action. The other
Your
thing,
Sanctum Sanctorum is full of draperies, Doctor Strange. There's draperies everywhere. Be careful.
they're mystically protected from his cigarettes, I'm sure, at this point. But the one thing that just finally jumped out at me is like why I was a little bit confused the first time I read this, and I hadn't quite gotten it. In the flashback sequence, he's wearing these yellow, whatever the Himalayan version of sweat clothes would be. And then in the framing sequence here, he's wearing yellow jammy bottoms. I wish that they had had different colors for those two things because it does make it a little bit less clear that we're now in present day.
I think the colorist just got confused. I think the colorist wasn't paying attention to the craggy panel borders and didn't realize we'd come out of a flashback in the middle of the page on the last page.
Right, which then makes it easier for someone to not realize that when reading it. But that's a minor quibble, and it has nothing to do with what Atkins did.
Yeah. Well, what a gorgeous issue. What a treat. What a wonderful issue. Obviously it makes it harder for us to do this podcast for Marvel to have so many books now, but they really are making it seem like a great idea to give Doctor Strange its own book here. So let's go ahead and move on to the other book that used to be part of Strange Tales and now is broken out into its own new number one, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. number one. On the cover, it says, "Who is Scorpio?" This is an absolutely amazing, gorgeous cover. It is a bunch of children's play blocks stacked up, and in amongst the box, we have Nick Fury, Val, Dum Dum, this new character, Scorpio, and seemingly one of Scorpio's goons. And we have all sorts of psychedelic effects on the box so that this looks like a very cool, groovy, psychedelic Austin Powers style cover.
Well, I think as we're going to find out on the inside, that one you said looks like one of Scorpio's goons is actually Nick Fury.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, you're right. So then we begin with some of the most infamous pages in Marvel history because of what went down. We begin with a page where it just has the credits. Stan Lee, editor, Jim Steranko, writer and illustrator, Joe Sinnott, inker, Sam Rosen, letterer, have teamed up to prevent the first S.H.I.E.L.D. novel-length epic of unforgettable suspense and drama. We then get sort of a Will Eisner-esque splash page with the words "Who is Scorpio" sort of carved into the side of this giant stone obelisk as this mysterious figure climbs up the side of it as it's sort of rising out of this crashing surf. It is absolutely gorgeous.
And actually, I just noticed the bats. I hadn't seen that before.
Yes.
But there are bats flying in front of the moon.
Yes. Then we get something we've never seen before in a Marvel comic. We get silent pages. We see that this is seemingly Nick Fury, who is climbing up to the top. We see him get to the top, open a hatch, lower himself down using a sort of grappling device, use a blowtorch, get his way inside. Go on to the next page. He cleverly distracts a guard by throwing something for the guard to find and then kicking him in the head. He is then trying to break in another place, but suddenly a goon comes up through the floor and shoots him dead. That was the end of the silent sequence. So it's just a 3-page silent sequence. Pages 1, 2, and 3. I say infamous because of the way Marvel reacted to this. Saul Brodsky. So Stan Lee was listed as the editor on this book, but apparently the real editor was Saul Brodsky, who was, what was his official title at Marvel? He was like traffic.
I thought it was his production something or other.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, but one way or the other, he was a back office guy who would occasionally get called in to do other duties.
So Steranko turns in these pages, and Saul Brodsky says, "I'll pay you for the art for those first 3 pages, but I'm not going to pay you for writing," because he didn't put any words on them. Steranko then supposedly said, "I'm going to throw you out this expletive window," to Saul Brodsky, and eventually did convince Brodsky to pay him for writing, because it is writing. Writing silent pages is writing. Just because you're not covering them with words doesn't mean it's not writing. Eventually, Marvel would come to realize that this was a great type of writing. There would later be an issue of G.I. Joe that was entirely done like this, and I think very much a tribute to this issue.
That came out when we were kids. I wasn't even a big G.I. Joe fan, but that issue was, everyone was just like, you've got to, got to look at this issue. This is amazing.
It was amazing. And then later, Marvel decided to do a whole month of wordless comics that they called Nuff Said, because famous Stan Lee phrase, Nuff Said. And so they did a whole month of wordless comics. That all started with these 3 pages. Well, then don't worry, Saul Brodsky, because we get a ton of words on page 4, and we get a very clever plot twist here, which is like, yep, it turns out the goon who came out through the floor and shot and killed Nick Fury was himself Nick Fury, and the Nick Fury who was killed was a life model decoy. And Fury's like, well, we've tried to see if my life model decoy can break into this fortress, but each time I've been able to kill him. So that tells us what we need to know about the life model decoys. And then he's like, well, Dum Dum first says, oh, don't worry. When you shot him, you got him dead center all 4 times you shot him. And Nick Fury's like, but I only shot him 3 times. And they're like, what? And they realize someone else was there and also shot Nick Fury, thinking it was the real Nick Fury. So he realizes that he's been murdered, that it's a very ironic and bizarre way to get murdered, because when he was shooting the life model decoy, imitating him, someone else was shooting at it and would have killed it. And so then he's trying to figure out who it is. He just finds a little disc, which has an emblem representing the Scorpio zodiac sign. So very clever way to begin this issue. Then we do something really strange. This suddenly starts to feel more like a 1960s TV show than it does like a movie. It starts to feel like an episode of Mission Impossible, or even like an episode of like The Naked City, or one of the more sophisticated shows that was on TV at the time. We then cut to a nightclub, an absolutely gorgeous page where we're looking at this nightclub comic. Most of the panel is a reflection of the nightclub comic and the patrons and the sort of Playboy Bunny waitresses in this mirrored wall. But then there are some people who are then in front of the wall, and that is the owner of the nightclub and another one of the waitresses. It turns out this nightclub comic isn't very good, and he's very sweaty and nervous and is getting bossed around by his boss. He is worried about how he's going to take care of his family. Then we jump. They say that a poorly written story is all over the map. Well, I don't think this is a poorly written story, but this is literally all over the map. We began with wherever this shield fortress was. Then we jump to San Francisco, where the nightclub is. Then we jump to Kansas City, where there is a hitman who looks somewhat like the nightclub comic, who is being told that he's going to get a big payoff. We then cut back to New York, where Nick and Val are walking along in the rain. We then cut to just elsewhere, but seemingly in Europe, absolutely gorgeous art of a Grand Prix race, presumably going on in Le Mans or somewhere in Europe. We see that perhaps the person driving the race is Scorpio. They seem to have a Scorpio tattoo. We then cut to the Nevada desert. We're just literally jumping all around the world here. We see that Nick Fury is once again trying out weapons on himself, which he loves to do, and it's not a good idea if you're the head of an organization. But he is using a protective force field and having all of S.H.I.E.L.D. shoot all of their weapons at him while he's using his protective force field. He is then relaxing.
Let's talk about the effect on the bottom of page 8.
Yes.
Again, I really wish I could know exactly how he came up with these various psychedelic-looking effects, whether this is something he just drew with, like, charcoal on paper and transferred it onto here, or it doesn't look like that, though. It looks like it's some kind of recursive pattern from some sort of reflections or some kind of electromagnetic field or something like that. It's really, really interesting.
Yes. Very psychedelic. Very cool. you can see where his force field was protecting him and the ground underneath him, and then how all the weapons that were attacking the force field have dug out a moat all around him where the force field was. And then he's like, oh, I'm feeling a little breeze. He's like, wait, I shouldn't feel any breeze. I'm inside a protective force field. And it's like going, oh no, and there's more weapons coming to attack me, and my force field isn't working anymore. And then he suddenly realizes, oh, well, there's a jet car near me, so I can go ahead and grab onto the rocket sled for testing astronauts that happens to be right by me, which is a weird plot turn. Manages to get away. And then there's a lot going on in the gutters here on page 11. The missile is about to blow up where he just was. He's still hanging onto the rocket sled. Well, at some point, he's gotten off the rocket sled and onto a motorcycle, and he's figured out where Scorpio is. And I guess Scorpio is attacking the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters because there's Val unconscious on the floor. Nick Fury has gotten on a S.H.I.E.L.D. motorcycle and is crashing through some sort of wooden wall, it looks like, even though this is a high-tech metal headquarters. And I guess that's maybe crashing through a wooden door. It's a little unclear.
And that motorcycle has jets on it. So it's not just a motorcycle. It's a jet motorcycle.
Yes. And so big two-page splash. We know that Steranko loves his two-page splashes. Scorpio has a very cool look. He's dressed all in red. He's carrying something called this Zodiac Key, which later would bizarrely show up in Micronauts when I was first reading Micronauts as a little kid. So I look at the Zodiac Key. I'm like, oh, yes, from Micronauts. But he, rescues Val, gets in a big fight with Zodiac. They're fighting on page 14. We then cut back to, meanwhile, in a nearby Palace of Chance, Lady Luck begins to deal the final hand of the game. So now we seem to be in Las Vegas because there's a little photograph of the strip in Las Vegas. The nightclub comic, well, the hitman shows up to get paid, but instead the goon who's supposed to pay the hitman accidentally pays the nightclub comic. The hitman then sees the goon and is like, hey, where's my money? It's like, what do you mean? I just gave you my money. And then they end up getting in a big shootout. Meanwhile, Nick Fury and Scorpio are still fighting. They fight for several more pages. And then we cut back to Vegas, where the goon tries to get away in a little flying sci-fi ship, but the hitman shoots and blows it up and kills him.
That's completely coincidental in that the hitman who has been injured in a shootout with the other mobster seems to think that this hovering ship has something to do with the whole thing. And so as his dying action, he shoots the ship and happens to hit it in a vital spot.
Yes, but this is two different things going on at the same time. We've got Scorpio getting away, climbing a ladder to go up to his sci-fi ship in one part of the country, and I think in a different part of the country we have the goon who thought he had paid off the hitman climbing a ladder to get into his sci-fi ship. But these are in different places, right?
Are they? No, I thought that was... No, that's Scorpio's thing, isn't it? I think that the other hitman is trying to get away, and so just like, hey, look, here's this rope ladder that happens to be here, and... Let's see, to be followed moments later by another who simply seeks to evade deadly pursuit. Then one of the gunmen crumples to the street, mortally wounded. So no, this is the same vehicle, and it's just that the dark-haired mobster just saw, hey, here's a rope ladder, this can get me away from this shootout.
But this makes no sense because there's a photo montage showing that this is happening in Vegas, and they said... Oh, I guess this does make sense. If they're out where they're doing missile testing in Nevada, I guess this whole story is happening in Vegas. Okay.
Well, except for the part that was specifically Kansas City and the part that looks like it was probably Europe.
Yeah. And we know that Val and Nick were in New York at one point. They were identified as being in New York.
Yes.
Okay. I got a little confused here. But so then the ship that seemed like it had Scorpio in it blows up. And Val says, there's one thing we may never know. And Nick says, what's that? And Val asks, who was Scorpio? And indeed, that's not going to be answered for another 3 issues. But then we cut to the nightclub comic who calls his family. Absolutely beautiful panel on page 19 of him imagining his family, who are done entirely in Zipatone with no actual black line work.
Or done in duotone paper.
Oh, you think that's what that is?
That's definitely duotone paper, yeah.
Okay. It turns out when the goon tried to pay off the hitman and accidentally paid off the nightclub comic, he had included a bomb in the bag of stuff. And then the bomb goes off and blows up the comic. And Nick Fury is there. And it's like, what just happened? And they realize that the bomb has gone off and killed the nightclub comic. And they have no idea why. And then we get another duotone panel on the final page of, I guess that's Nick Fury in a trench coat walking away, while somehow the phone has survived the blowing up of the phone booth, because it says, we see the dangling phone receiver saying another 50 cents, deposit 50 cents more, please. It says, and it rained most of that day and far into the night. So obviously this issue, I got a little confused, but this is still an absolutely amazing issue. Really feels like a 1960s TV show at its best. Like, the whole story of the nightclub comic has nothing to do with this issue. You know, Nick Fury never meets this nightclub comic, never realizes what's going on with him. It's just this little story that adds pathos to this issue. And it is just so wonderful. It's so meaningful. It's so gorgeous. It's so wonderfully written and wonderfully illustrated. And I jumps around too much. We're jumping around the country too much, and I'm getting confused. But other than that, I love this issue. What do you think of this issue?
Yeah, visually just absolutely stunning. Story, structure-wise, certainly ambitious, if nothing else. Yeah, it's a legendary issue, and deservedly so. That said, I was perfectly happy to let you claim this one to recap, because I, too, was afraid I was going to get kind of confused, and I wanted to let you do that. So, yeah. A couple of things I do want to point out. Steranko, my understanding is, tended to color his own work. And we do notice that we have a few completely gray panels that are in here, with him just choosing not to put any color in places. But one thing I notice about this is they were able to make it a little bit less potentially confusing and a little bit more suspenseful, in that when we're first introduced to the stand-up comic Flip Mason, which I'm like, sounds like Flip Wilson, but Flip Wilson was a black comic and this doesn't look anything like him, but okay. Yeah. But when we first see Flip Mason, he's colored in these nightclub lit colors, and so it's not clear that he has the same blonde hair as the Hitman. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Therefore, it's not as confusing when we then cut to Kansas City and see the blonde Hitman. And it also saves the revelation that they look almost identical until the moment when that is significant.
Yeah.
And I think that really paid off well. Yeah, there is the sort of question about, like, is that rocket sled the same thing as the rocket motorcycle that he's riding in? Like, is that...
Clearly not. Like, you can see the rocket sled on page 11. It clearly looks nothing like the rocket motorcycle, but he seems to transfer from his rocket sled to his rocket motorcycle almost instantaneously here. You know, it's hard to tell. It's confusing.
And on page 14, where we see Scorpio holding up his Zodiac key, there is a really nice color hold effect for the background of that panel. It looks like Steranko took some sort of a black page with white spatter on it and then somehow duplicated the white spatter, rotated a few degrees. And it just creates this really vertigo-inducing effect through a really, really simple pattern. Stunning work.
You know, I left this issue with the impression that we were going to follow up on the Scorpio storyline in the next issue. We don't. You sort of realize in the second issue this was supposed to be sort of a done-in-one story where it's just a mystery who Scorpio was or what he was trying to do, but that's supposed to be sort of a mystery that we don't follow up on. I think that either the editor or the readers complained, and so then finally he does come back to the Scorpio storyline on his 5th issue of the book, which turns out to be his last issue of the book. And spoiler alert, it will turn out that Scorpio is Nick Fury's brother. But we do not know that yet at this point, and Nick Fury seemingly does not recognize him.
Oh, and one last thing to mention is that one shot that's in New York City, which, as you said, complicates this whole thing, and that it seems to start it starts in the water. I don't know. Anyway, one way or the other. That shot that's clearly in New York City, we see a down shot on Nick and Val past some street signs, and one of the street signs is to a public shelter, which, public shelter capacity 300. I just remember when we were growing up in the late 70s and early 80s, I would still see civil defense fallout shelter signs around, just like in school and stuff like that. And I have said before that I think that social distancing, stay 6 feet away signs are going to be that equivalent for kids who are born, in the mid 20-teens. Wait, what was that for? Why are these signs all over the place? What's going on? And just no one's ever bothered to take them down. Anyway, public shelter capacity 300, because of course everyone's going to be able to just shelter in place when the nuclear war happens.
Yes. Or is that a homeless shelter? This wasn't clear to me. But anyway.
That's a possibility. I assumed that it was a fallout shelter.
Maybe. I don't know.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and move on, shall we?
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to Captain America number 102. But I just dearly love both these Doctor Strange and S.H.I.E.L.D. books. They're just absolutely wonderful books. But let's see. I think the Captain America book's pretty good too. Why don't you go ahead and talk about that?
Yeah. Captain America 102, The Sleeper Strikes. And on the cover, we have the Sleeper tossing Captain America like a rag doll towards us as we see Agent 13 gesticulating in the background. Look out, world. This is where the Sleeper strikes. Take warning. You're about to meet one of the world's most dangerous band of killers when enter the Exiles. Produced and immortalized by Smilin' Stan Lee and Jolly Jack Kirby, embellished by Sizzlin' Sid Shores, lettered by adorable Artie Simek. So, when we last saw Captain America, he was bobbing up to the surface from the undersea bunker, thank you, from the Red Skull. Now we see that he has been rescued and taken to a naval hospital. Nick Fury walks in. Steve Rogers says, "Is that you, Fury?" as he's facing away. Fury says, "Who'd you expect? The lovin' spoonful?" And we will see another very similar line in Avengers that is instead about strawberry alarm clock. So you can get an idea of what was going on in other pop culture at the time here.
Yeah.
All right. So
he does not say soupy sales. So the age of soupy sales is over.
Yes. So Captain America is apparently keeping this crystal key that's supposed to control the sleeper in a vase. And so he pulls the thing out and he's like, yeah, this is supposed to control it, but I have no idea what to do. Turns out that the Red Skull was also rescued by his people, which is a group called the Exiles, which are basically just Nazis who have been hiding out waiting for someone to come back to lead them. And now the Red Skull has come back and is taking control of this group of Nazis. They go to an island hideout that, once again, it's one of those things where we're probably only ever going to see it once, but it's a really fantastic looking design. Page 4,
yes.
Top panel.
I love
but as they're getting to that, though, on the previous page, page 3, panel 4, there's a speech balloon coming from the submarine that contains the Red Skull and the Exiles saying, "Master, we are using our sonar signals to help us through the bed of killer kelp. Within seconds, we shall reach our hidden isle." So apparently their island is protected by killer kelp, which
yes.
I don't know if that's really the best use of your resources, but, who am I to say? So yes. Captain America is being loaded up with a bunch of gizmos, weapons of various sorts, which he usually doesn't like, but he takes them seemingly reluctantly here. Runs out of the U.S. Naval Hospital and is immediately attacked, presumably still on naval grounds. I don't know. Do they have naval hospitals that aren't on naval bases? I don't.
I think the implication is it's in New York City, but I'm not sure.
Okay, maybe so. But literally, as soon as he walks out the front door, he's being attacked by guns. There's this one, and these are the Exiles here. One of them is wearing these special, super punch
I don't
fists.
think these are the Exiles. I think that the Exiles are over on the island, and this is in New York or whatever. The Exiles are like wretched old people. This is a strapping young person who is wearing his solid steel gloves to beat up Captain America. I would say I would not describe this person as an exile. His name is Gottfried. Perfect timing, Gottfried. You downed him. I would not describe Gottfried as an exile.
Okay, well, he's a Red Skull goon, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. I was just thinking the Red Skull goons in this story are being called the Exiles, is the way I was
No,
taking
but they're
it.
not goons. I think the Exiles are allies of the Red Skull, but they're not his goons. He wouldn't send them out to go beat anybody up, I don't think.
Okay. All right. I was thinking of them as goons who have been laying in wait for somebody to goon for once again. But
Yeah.
we're talking semantics here. So
Yeah.
Captain America dispatches with these folks, except there's one who's about to get the drop on him until Agent 13 saves him. Although the guy who gets the drop on him, he's behind Captain America, so his shield isn't there. But he then says, maybe so, but you will never live to learn that much information, much less to reveal it. Even your shield cannot save you now, rather than just pulling the trigger, right?
Yeah.
Agent 13 then dispatches with him off panel.
I love how the guy has time to give a, whatever this is, 20-word long speech about how Cap doesn't have time to move his shield.
Yes.
And it's like, I think by the time you've said 20 words about how Cap doesn't have time to move his shield, he would have plenty of time to move his shield.
Indeed.
But he doesn't need to, because here comes Agent 13 with a big-ass gun to shoot and presumably kill the dude.
And she had supposedly forced Nick Fury to tell her the truth about Captain America's whereabouts. So now they are reunited and it feels so good.
Yes.
So meanwhile, the Sleeper is continuing his reign of terror, or its reign of terror. We see a seismograph that is trying to follow where he is and what he is doing. There is some sort of factory that it is about to dispatch with next, and so they evacuate it just in time for it to completely destroy the factory in a great sequence of panels that ends in a splash page on page 10 of the entire thing going up in a blaze of glory.
One of the hardest things to draw. Drawing a factory blowing up is just a thankless task. And Kirby loves it. And Shores does a great job with it.
Yes. We see once again that this Sleeper has the ability to change its density so that it can pass through solid rock, very much as the Vision will be able to do shortly. Captain America and Agent 13 are taking a helicopter to, I think, go find the Red Skull. And then they are attacked by a bunch of goons in what I like to refer to as the recumbent bike version of the jetpack.
Yes.
They're basically like these sort of lounge chairs with your legs out in front of you and a joystick right between your legs that you're hovering around in at a 45-degree angle to the ground.
Yes. And they have no propellers or jets or anything that would seem to keep them aloft, but they're just zipping around in these flying lazy boys that seemingly have no way to propel them off the ground.
And don't get me wrong, they look awesome.
Yes.
They look fantastic. I love them. Well, on the bottom of page 12, we do see what looks like sort of a jet coming out of the bottom of one of them.
I guess.
Page 12, last panel on the left.
Yeah.
They destroy the helicopter that Captain America and Agent 13 were in, but they've got parachutes that help them descend safely. On page 13, one of them is pursuing Captain America, but then Captain America leads him into crashing right into a tree, and it looks like it's right out of, what's the popular TV show in Idiocracy? Ow, my balls.
I never saw it actually. I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, it got the guy right in the family jewels there. Yeah, but Captain America was using sort of a little hand blaster thing, and it was one of the gadgets he was given. He goes ahead and takes that off. I guess it's done its job, and so he's going to get rid of it. They find... right. What they were going to get was to find the latest spot of destruction of the Sleeper, because they're trying to track it down, because now they have this crystal key. They're trying to figure out how to use it to destroy or control the Sleeper. So the Sleeper then comes out of the ground, and Captain America is trying to fight it. Of course, this is a super powerful, mechanical being, and so he's not really having that much luck. But then Agent 13 is holding the crystal key while Captain America is getting beat up by the Sleeper, and she is feeling more and more fear for his safety, and the Sleeper starts to stagger. And it turns out that the crystal key is controlled by the emotions of the person holding it. And so since she was all hysterical, like a woman, that therefore, as opposed to when Captain America had it, where he's like, I have got nerves of steel. I do not understand how this works. It was able to help destroy the sleeper, at which point the crystal key itself disappears as well. The Red Skull, meanwhile, in his lair, is watching this on some kind of viewoscope and realizes that now he knows what he needs to do to defeat Captain America, because he has a weakness, which is this woman whom he cares for. So
Yes.
Next issue, The Weakest Link.
And then you just see the silhouettes of the exiles behind Red Skull here, but we still haven't really met them, even though it promised we would.
Yes. All right, so tell me your thoughts on this issue.
First thing I have in my notes is, how is Red Skull alive and free? Which was totally not seemingly the case at the end of last issue.
Yes.
It's unclear to me when Captain America comes out of the building if the guy with the solid steel gloves was lying in wait to attack Captain America, or if he was like in the middle of committing some sort of crime and Captain America gets the jump on him. That was unclear. Later, when Captain America is parachuting down to the Exiles Island, he has a wrist blaster. He's got some sort of laser attached to his gloves, and he's able to shoot lasers out of his gloves. And I'm like, why did you do that now? And why don't you always do that? Like, you should just always have lasers you can shoot out of your gloves, Captain America. It makes so much more sense than throwing your shield and hoping your shield bounces right back to you every time.
And he gets rid of it, like literally panels later.
Yeah. Like, no, never get rid of that, Captain America. Always have that. I end my notes by going, okay, but fairly bizarre and hard to follow issue. Sleeper was substantial villain and the fight was satisfying. And then I note at the end that there's a letter from Doug Mensch, the future great Marvel writer. I thought this was a great issue. I continue to like Shore's inking, I think, more than you do. I love Kirby's work on this entire issue. Love Stan Lee's work. Love everybody's work. I think this is just, like I said, a little bit hard to follow, but really enjoyable issue. I liked the Sleeper a lot and like how he was defeated. I think it's fun to have the twist be that the key is powered by emotion.
Yes, it's also nice, a little twist at the end, that now that Captain America and Agent 13 are together, that this is going to give the Red Skull the key to his vanquishing of Captain America, or so it would seem.
Yes. All right, let's go and finish up the month with Avengers number 53, the Avengers versus the X-Men. So we always end the month on the Avengers because whenever there is any sort of crossover between books, the Avengers issue always comes last. Avengers always seemingly was the last book Marvel would publish in a given month, because it's happened now that the Avengers has crossed over with just about every book in the Marvel Universe, and always the Avengers issue happens at the end of the month. And indeed, this is the case here, because here we get a storyline that is continuing from this month's X-Men and continuing into the Avengers and wrapping up here in the Avengers. We have on the cover the Avengers, who now are up to 4 members: Goliath, the Wasp, Hawkeye, and Black Panther, still with a half face mask so you can see who he is, fighting the X-Men. Well, Angel is seemingly being held captive in some way, and so we have 4 X-Men fighting the 4 Avengers: Marvel Girl, Cyclops, Iceman, and the Beast. Credits from this issue: ticket from Stan Lee, editor Roy Thomas writer, and John Buscema artist. This one's going to flip you. At least that's what happened to George Tuska inker and Artie Simek letterer. So we get, once again, Tuska inking Buscema, which is not the most ideal combination, but I like it. I like the art in this issue well enough. I think Tuska does a pretty good job inking John Buscema. Not as great as some other people do.
Well, and you didn't mention that the part that starts with "at least" is actually written flipped around upside down.
Yes. We jump inside the issue. It says, "In battle joined." We begin right where the X-Men issue left off, where Cyclops was standing over an unconscious Quicksilver, and suddenly the Avengers come in through the roof. They are getting ready to attack Cyclops. When we had Paris Collins on, he talked about how in Marvel Comics, frequently the story driver was any excuse for the heroes to fight each other. We talked about how that issue of Fantastic Four, when he was on, was an any excuse to fight issue. Well, this is another any excuse to fight issue.
Yes.
And they have a bit too many reasons to fight, because they keep coming to come up with more and more reasons for the X-Men and Avengers to fight each other. They've got plenty of reasons to fight each other. 2 of the former Avengers did leave to go join with a mutant separatist group, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, and the Avengers are understandably pissed about that, and the X-Men are understandably divided about that because they're mutants themselves. But they get into a big fight for a bunch of pages. We get a bizarre little flashback of how the Angel originally fetched the Avengers and when had a brief interaction with the skydiver. Angel shows up at Avengers headquarters. They take him prisoner. He convinces them finally to go to Magneto's island. They go ahead and go to Magneto's island. Then they find that, remember, we were confused last issue, or I think it might have been 2 issues ago, about how the Angel got away so easily and whether or not Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch had somehow helped him get away or how he'd gotten away. Well, it turns out it was Magneto himself who had helped him get away because he has a tracker on him that was tracking him and now tracking the Avengers through this whole thing. And the Avengers are pissed about the whole thing and tie him up and decide to enter the building without him. Inside the building, Magneto is still being absolutely horrible to Toad, like really horrible to Toad. Away, you spineless gargoyle, I can stand no more of your mealy-mouthed whining. Magneto is watching the heroes fight the villains. Unfortunately, they then felt like they have to come up with yet another reason for them to fight each other, so Magneto uses his machinery to mentally zonk the X-Men to convince them that the Avengers are their enemies, which we already sort of had. I mean, the Avengers already tied up the Angel. You know, there's plenty of reasons to think they're your enemies, but now they're being mentally zonked in addition to all the other reasons they have to fight. We then get what everybody wants. We get our Any Excuse to Fight issue where the Avengers and the X-Men are using their powers against each other and having a big fight for several pages, which is fun to watch. It is always nice to get to see heroes wailing on each other, and this issue has a lot of that. Eventually, it turns out that the Avengers aren't so dumb that they figured out that the reason the Angel had a tracking device on him was because Magneto had set this whole thing up, and so they intentionally tied up Angel loosely, knowing that the Angel would get free and go and confront Magneto, which he does just in time. It unzonks the X-Men. Everybody then knows how to attack Magneto. Magneto realizes he has to flee. Magneto gets in a ship, but there on the ship is the Toad. Magneto is trying to fly towards the ship, but the Toad... Now, this makes no sense, and in the dialogue, they hang a lantern on the fact that it makes no sense. But Magneto gets to the edge of the ship and is grabbing on to climb himself into the ship when the Toad suddenly stamps on his foot and says, "No, Magneto, the Toad calls no man master ever again," and knocks Magneto down onto the rocky breakers where Magneto seemingly dies. Of course, Magneto shouldn't need to climb himself up into a ship. He should be able to magnetically lift himself up into a ship. That's never made exactly clear. Well, can't he just bring the ship to him because he has power over all metal? Well, don't worry. The Toad has an explanation for that. Yes, fool, and my magnetism shall... Wait, it's having no effect on the ship. To which Toad says, "Don't you remember, Magneto? You built one ship out of non-metals just to prove you could do it. And now, Toad, stop, I am your master." "No, Magneto, no, the Toad calls no man master ever again." So they feel like they have to explain why he can't just manipulate the ship itself and explain that just out of sheer cussedness that Magneto decided to build a presumably wooden flying saucer type ship to get away in, just to prove he could build a non-magnetic ship. This makes no sense, as with so many times when Roy Thomas feels compelled to hang a lantern on things that he thinks make no sense. It would be better if he just ignored it. You could just say that Magneto is feeling rather woozy from everything that's been going on, and that would have been just fine. I think that that would have been enough of an explanation as to why he feels he has to sort of desperately claw his way onto the ship and put himself in a position where the Toad can just kick his ass and kick him off the ship, rather than explaining that he decided on a whim to build a non-metal ship. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. But other than that, I love this issue. I think that this is a good Any Excuse to Fight issue, and it is great to finally wrap up this big Magneto, Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver storyline that's been going through, at this point, 7 or 8 issues of the Avengers and 5 or 6 issues of X-Men. And it's turned into a huge crossover storyline, and now it's finally over, which is great. And I think it's really great to have Magneto treat the Toad so awfully throughout this entire storyline in both books, and then for the turnabout is fair play moment at the end where the Toad finally stands up for himself and seemingly kills Magneto. That's a great twist. What do you say?
Yeah, actually, with you talking about the non-metal ship, that's actually telegraphed a little bit on page 19, I just noticed. Page 19, panel 5, Toad is saying, and I'm sorry, I always read him with a Peter Lorre voice, "There is a ship below, a very special ship." That seems to be referencing the fact that it's this non-magnetic ship, which, again, is just a weird thing. You could, as you said just a minute ago, just be like, oh, well, Magneto is so shocked by the idea that Toad is actually going to stand up for himself that it doesn't occur to him that he's going to need to do anything to protect himself. And yet here we are. Maybe this is explained by some of the retroactive, like, oh, this was all part of my plan, and oh, this was all part of my plan, and this was all part of our plan kind of hijinks that gets into this. But there is the question of right at the beginning, why Cyclops is antagonistic to the Avengers. It might make sense why the Avengers are antagonistic to Cyclops, but not why Cyclops is immediately acting like they're here to attack me. Because he had specifically said, hey, Angel, go get the Avengers and maybe they can save us. And then the Avengers show up. You'd think that his initial response would be, hey, great, Avengers, I'm glad you're here. Hey, wait, why are you being mean to me? Rather than seeming to be just as antagonistic right off the bat. Doesn't make much sense to me.
Any excuse, Steve. Any excuse.
Any excuse. At one point during the big long fight between the Avengers and the X-Men, on page 17, panel 4, we see in the foreground Iceman is all gummed up by what looks like slimy seaweed or something like that. And Hawkeye is saying, I've got Cool Hand Luke too gummed up to attack too. But it's like, what did Hawkeye do to him? What?
He's got a seaweed arrow. He's got an arrow that gums you up in sticky seaweed.
Yeah, I guess so. I wish I had seen what Hawkeye had done. I'd like to see that arrow do something rather than just be like, oh, well, clearly this must have been Hawkeye because he's there in that panel. What? But yes, the art in this issue is great, and Toad finally having his vengeance on Magneto. It is a little unclear to me. You know, you say they've ended this whole Scarlet Witch Quicksilver storyline, but it's a little bit unclear to me where exactly they have ended up in all of this. I mean, they're in the ship with the Toad, but are they now going to be coming back to the Avengers? Are they going off and doing their own thing? Are they going to... You know, it's unclear to me what's going on there. So I don't know if I'd necessarily call that storyline completely wrapped up yet, but we'll see where that goes. But yeah, there is a little bit too much of the, oh, well, we Avengers figured that out, so we tied him up loosely and he got free because that was our plan. And Magneto being like, oh, well, yes, the X-Men got free, but that's because I let them and that was part of my plan. And then the Avengers, when they started fighting amongst each other for no good reason, later they're like, ah, yes, well, we wanted to convince Magneto that we were fighting amongst each other, so that was part of our plan. And there's just a little too much of that in this issue. But that being said, it's still a fun issue.
Yeah. Curtis penciling, good enough inking, and really a satisfying wrap up to a big, long storyline in two different books. It's very much happy to be where we are, and we've just got even better issues of Avengers coming up.
So I guess that brings us to the end of this month. Just as a note about next month, not only do we have a full 13 issues once again, in addition to that, we have a 64-page magazine of Spider-Man material to get through. And all of that is dated July 1968.
But you realize I was looking ahead too, and I was like, oh no, we've got 13 issues plus this double-page book. But then starting the month after that, we're going to have 13 issues plus every month after that, Silver Surfer is going to have his own double-sized book that's going to be published every month. So not only is 14 issues going to be standard, but one of those issues being double-sized is going to be standard.
I thought this was going to go back down at some point here.
Yeah, no, it's not.
But this next month, we're probably, Matt and I have been talking back and forth about it, and I'm thinking we're going to have to break it up into 4 separate episodes just because that Spectacular Spider-Man magazine, that isn't double-sized, that's triple-sized.
Yeah,
so
I think we can do it. I think we can fit it into 3 episodes. We're going to see if we end up with a guest. That's part of, we may or may not have a guest for some part of the month. So that's going to make things even more complicated. But if we don't have a guest, I'd say we can handle all 14 of these books in 3 episodes. We'd have to see.
Okay. As you can hear, dear listener, we're still in discussions about this. We will find out. We do not yet know the answer to this ourselves.
You are getting to hear how the sausage is made right now.
I think that's it from both of us, yes?
Yes, that's it for me.
Okay. Well, thank you once again for everybody who listens. Please, if you haven't done so far, give us a rating and or review on whichever podcatcher you use. That helps us to be found by other people, and we like to be heard by as many people as we can. And thank you very much, those of you who support our Patreon. We very much appreciate that, supporting this work that we do.
Yes, indeed.
All right. That's it. Thanks a lot, everybody. Going to go ahead and say goodbye. Take care, and as always, stay safe out there.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, we now have a Patreon where you can show your appreciation. If you've got a few bucks, head over to patreon.marvelrereadclub.com to support us. Also, you can still rate and review us at your podcatcher of choice, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. You can find us online at marvelrereadclub.com, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. See you next time.